Let's go then. Okay, so this is something, snowshoeing is something that almost anyone can do, as I said on the introduction or on the description. First, I'd like to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Another thing I'd like to plug is cleats. I've never owned cleats until last year. I finally bought a pair. But as we get older, and sometimes in the Twin Cities, we don't get a lot of snow, but we do get a lot of ice. It's nice to have a pair of cleats. So if you do want to get out in the winter without going too far afield and we don't get any snow, let's hope we get a lot of snow. I hope we do. But if we don't, I just want to say that cleats are a really good idea. And these were expensive ones that I got. I thought I'd splash out, but you can also get them for a lot cheaper too. So, okay, back to snowshoeing. So why would you want to snowshoe? One reason is to get around. This was after a snow at my house one day, and I went out shopping after this. I put my snowshoes on and went down the hill. But also, what we've been doing a lot lately, well, before COVID, is going to a restaurant, a Mexican restaurant down the hill, so we can walk through the park and go to the restaurant. But we did that in the middle of last winter, and it was really cold and snowy. And the owner of the restaurant, who being from Mexico, he thought we were going to die if we tried to walk back home. So he wanted to give us a ride home, but he didn't. And we managed to snowshoe back up the hill. So it's nice to be able to use them just, for getting around. But other reasons is they're a lot of fun. You can see these people having a lot of fun with their snowshoes. Maybe not so much, but rovers certainly have a lot of fun with their snowshoes. So on a lot of the bigger trips that we've been doing in the past and will do again, we include snowshoeing. Things like the Bayfield trip, National Forest Lodge, Deep Portage. A lot of these trips we snowshoe. And snowshoeing is a good form of exercise. As you can see here, a few rovers worn out from snowshoeing. You do get a good workout. The other thing I really love about it is looking at the tracks out in the snow. It always amazes me a couple of days after the snows come down, all the tracks you see. I mean, you hardly ever see these animals, but there's a lot out there and you can try and figure out what they are. This was a Deep Portage and I was thinking it might have been a wolf, but I couldn't really measure it to figure it out exactly. The other nice thing about it is so quiet out there. When there's deep snow, it muffles all the sound. And when you're snowshoeing, you really don't make a lot of sound like you do with other, things you might do outdoors. It's also good if you want to go winter camping. You can drag all your stuff in. The other nice thing about snowshoeing, you can go into places in the winter that you probably wouldn't want to go to in the summer. They might be too wet, too buggy, and you can just go wandering off. And you don't need any special tracks or anything. You can just wander off in the woods, wander around in the parks or whatever. So it's pretty cool. So brief, and I mean brief, history of snowshoes. I found this, I thought was really interesting. This is the remains of a snowshoe that was found in the Alps from 5,800 years ago. So obviously people have been using snowshoes for a long time. And here in North America, it's a tradition with the Native Americans. This is from Northeast Canada. They make these beautiful, huge snowshoes. I don't know what they'd be like to snowshoe, and I'd love to get a pair. And also other indigenous people right here in the Minnesota area have used snowshoes for a lot of years. And I really believe they were probably invented in multiple places by multiple people. Because if you're trying to go out and hunt or do whatever and you're trudging through waist deep snow or knee deep snow, it doesn't take long before you think, wow, maybe I should strap a branch onto my feet and get up on the snow. And also if you see wolves and deer, wolves have big feet and they can get around pretty well on the snow, whereas deer have a really hard time because they got such skinny little dainty feet. So it seems like an obvious thing to come up with. So now you've had your history lesson, now a brief science lesson. So the idea of the snowshoe obviously is it sits up on the snow, and it does sink in a ways, but it doesn't go all the way to the bottom. But the thing is, and I didn't really realize this till I started snowshoeing, when you step in snowshoes, your back foot has to pivot. So the boot has to pivot. So you'll notice with these snowshoes, there's a hole here. The toe goes into the hole and it has to pivot around this area. And these areas of the lacing are reinforced because they get a lot of wear from the boot. So it's important that the boot can move like that. So that's something to look out for when you're buying snowshoes. So different types of snowshoes. This is one of the traditional ones. It's the modified bear paw. The original bear paw was pretty much round, which is a little harder to snowshoeing because you got to keep your feet wide apart. The good thing about these, they're short, so in the woods, they don't get tangled in the branches so much. The negative is you've got to bend the wood around, so it does put the wood under stress, so they can tend to break at the ends. Wood is stressed more. So something you can do is, one thing is these are often cheaper to buy, these type than some of the other ones. So that's something to look forward to. Another type of snowshoe is the Michigan or Huron snowshoes. These are the ones that look kind of like a tennis racket. These look less so than others. I got a pair of these because I wanted different kinds of snowshoes, and I didn't really like snowshoeing in these, so I put them up on the wall instead, which I kind of consider a bit of a waste. They should be used instead, but these weren't the best snowshoes to use. So these are Alaskan snowshoes. These are a lot longer and narrower. So you need a certain amount of area to keep yourself up on the snow. So if you want narrower snowshoes, then you need to obviously make them longer. So I tried to get a pair of these and I could never find a pair of these for a reasonable price. So, and these are the Ojibwe snowshoes, which are native to this area. The Ojibwe Indians, Native Americans used to use these. This is not the correct way to walk in snowshoes, by the way. These people are just kind of showing off. But nice thing about these, they're pointed at both ends, which help them stay straight. Also, it doesn't stress the wood because it's not bending it around, so they don't tend to break at the part where it's bent around because they're not bent. They're also, because of the way it curves up at the front, it's good for getting your snowshoe over branches and reeds and grass or whatever might be in your way. So I really like those for the wooden snowshoes. Of course, now most people use the aluminum and plastic snowshoes, kind of like this, except I've had these for a few years, so these are probably a little older now than some of the other ones that are out there. But these are nice because they're smaller, but they can still support you because there are not so many holes in the snowshoe, and they're lightweight, so they're more robust. You can throw them around a little more. You can throw them in the back of the car, so it makes it more convenient. And they also have, if you look, this is looking from the bottom, in case it's not obvious, but they have a crampon on the snowshoe, so it digs into the ice. So if you go out and you're not sure of the conditions and you run into packed snow and ice and then some regular snow, these kind of deal with different conditions better. One thing I want to point out here, if you notice here, it's got a pivot through here. So it's got this part attached and it pivots right here. So as the boot pivots, as the boot moves up and down, it pivots. But I did borrow a pair of these snowshoes once that didn't have this pivot. It just had the material, the plastic holding it. So every time you stepped, it would just flex and then it would flick snow up and the snow could go in the back of your boots. And also, I think after a while, the plastic would start to break. So that's something to look at if it has a nice pivot, so your foot can pivot in them. So when you get snowshoes, you can buy them. Most of the time you get them with bindings, or you can buy the bindings separately, and there's different kinds of bindings. These are the ones you often find in nature centers or places where they have a lot of snowshoes for people to use. They're a much cheaper alternative. So with these, you put the front of your boot, your toe goes down through this hole and then comes out the front here. And then this part at the back, you need to pull around the heel of your boot. So you can put your finger in this hole to pull it back. The problem with these is they're easy to get on when you're sitting in the living room in the warm, but when you get out in the cold, they get real stiff with the cold. So sometimes you have to take your gloves off to get them on because they get real stiff and you got to pull them around the boot. The other problem with them is your boot needs to pivot backwards and forwards, but you don't want it to rotate around the other, in the horizontal direction. You want them to stay in line with the snowshoes. And I have found sometimes that your foot will rotate around. So these are probably not the best, probably the cheapest option, but probably not the best binding. This is what's called the H binding, or modified H binding, you might hear it called. With these, your toe goes in here and you've got a strap to hold the toe in, a strap for the heel, and a strap to go across the boot. Now, when you're in the living room, when it's nice and warm, you can adjust these, the back strap and the front strap, to make sure it fits the boot. Then the only strap you need to put on when you go outside is the top strap. And that you can normally do with gloves. So these seem to work pretty well. And here's some of the bindings you get on the aluminum snowshoes. So in this case, you can see, again, you can adjust the front and back strap in the living room, and then you just need to put this clip on. So these are easy to do with gloves. I find them harder to take off with gloves, but by that time you're done snowshoeing, so you're heading in maybe. Also, here's another set, and this is where you have this tongue over here, pushes into here, and you just click the button to release them. And I've seen some other ones now where you wind a little knob, and it tightens up some wires. So they're very similar, some of the ones I've seen, to what you'd find on snowboard boots or snowboard bindings. So there's a lot of different options, but just make sure it's something you can put on easy and take off easy if you're going to buy a pair. And it's got a nice pivot on it. So where would you go to buy snowshoes? I'm sure there's a lot of places, but the places I think of, REI has a good selection of snowshoes. I just looked online, and they're probably starting at $100 and going up to $300. You probably don't want to buy the cheapest pair, but you know, you can spend a lot of money on them too. So you gotta decide, obviously. Another option is snowshoe.com, where you can actually get kits where you put the snowshoes together yourself. And the kits for Ojibwe are $159, and if you want to get them finished with the bindings, they're double that price. You can also there get Alaskan or Bear Paw and Huron snowshoes. So there's a few different options there. I looked online at Cabela's. They start $100. They had one kind of nice set where you got the snowshoe, the bindings, poles, and a bag to put it in, which was kind of nice. But a lot of times I don't normally use a bag, because when you get them back from snowshoeing, you've got snow and ice on them and you want it to melt off and have them dry, but it can be handy at times. But if you do spend the money and buy a good pair of snowshoes, I mean, they should last a lifetime. As long as you just use them in the snow and you don't abuse them too much. What does happen though, you end up crossing roads and stuff, and if you can't bother to take them off, they're going to get a bit more wear, but they really should last. You can also get them on Craigslist or eBay. I haven't dealt with eBay for years, but I have got snowshoes on there before. But I did look at Craigslist, and you know, $50 and up, they did have quite a selection of snowshoes. You can see something here. Some of them might be a little overpriced, but they weren't too bad. One thing to watch for though is if you buy snowshoes off Craigslist or somewhere and you find out they're really old, or if you find some in your uncle's cabin or whatever, if you get really old snowshoes, you might find instead of the lacing being nylon, it could be catgut. And you got to watch with catgut. Don't just throw them in the shed where the mice might get to it, because mice will just chew that up. And then next winter, you got to get your snowshoes out, and all you've got is a wooden frame and no lacing. So that would not be good. So watch out for that. So I mentioned about how you can make them from a kit. I've made Ojibwe snowshoes from a kit, and then I also ended up finishing my son's snowshoes because he didn't finish them, so I finished 2 pairs. And then I also helped out at some classes where they were making them, and I got really good at seeing where people had made mistakes. I'm good at finding people's mistakes. But it takes about 16 hours to build them from a kit. It's fun, but it is challenging, lacing them up and learning how to do some knots. And if you realize, you know, back 5, you know, knots ago, you made a mistake, you got to undo it. Or you can cheat like I did on one of my pairs, where you can use floss and actually use a needle and floss and actually sew up the mistake. But if you like craft stuff, it's a good option. And I thought if you're arty too, you could decorate the snowshoe and then varnish it after you've put some painting, some design on it or something. So if you make these, you do need to varnish them. And you do need, I think, an oil-based varnish because I don't think the water-based work as well. It is a cheaper alternative though. But if you want to make these and varnish them and get them ready this year, it's probably too late. You should start in the spring, and then you can varnish them outside so you don't have all the fumes, and then have them ready for next winter. So it's just another option. And was mentioned earlier, Rover equipment locker. Look at this slot here. I didn't realize we had that many snowshoes in the equipment locker. I'm not sure how often they get used. They do get taken on some of the big trips, or some of them do, but that's a good selection of snowshoes and poles. There's aluminum, there's the Ojibwe. So as Donna mentioned, these are available if you're a Rover member and if you're on an official Rover trip. So something to think about. So which snowshoes are the best? Well, this is my opinion, but I think the most important thing is they're the ones you will use. So they've got to be ones that you will take with you, and that are easy to put on, and you're going to actually use them, because otherwise it's going to be a shame if they don't get used. Having said that, the aluminum ones are probably easier. They're easier to put on and take off in a lot of cases. They're more robust and they're lighter, so they're easy to just throw in the trunk of the car in case you find a good place to snowshoe. Whereas with the wooden ones, you may not do that. If you want the wooden ones, I do like the Ojibwe. They are nice because they're the kind of the traditional snowshoe used around here. And they are pretty nice. And I think they're actually better in deep snow than the aluminum snowshoes, from my experience. Pros and cons of using wooden snowshoes. Some of the pros, they can be cheaper. They're traditional, and they leave nice tracks. And they're really interesting. So if you'd never seen a pair of Ojibwe snowshoes and you saw the tracks from Ojibwe snowshoes, I think you'd wonder what the heck was walking through the woods. So I thought it'd be really cool. And I don't know whether you can buy these. Maybe I should make them, but to have snowshoes that look like really big grizzly bear tracks, or like Sasquatch tracks or something like that. And then you could go walking around the woods with those. That'd be kind of cool. So a number of years ago, I did an experiment. We had 17 inches of snow. So I tried the 4 types of snowshoes I had, and they all sunk in about 6 inches. So they do sink into the snow, but it's a lot better than trying without the snowshoes. And of course, it's going to depend on the snow too. So if you get a really light snow, they're going to stink in more than if you get a heavy snow. Now, we went to Bayfield in February of this year. It seems like it was years ago now with all that's happened, but it was so when we were in Bayfield, they'd had a lot of snow weeks earlier, and then the sun, by the edge of the lake, the sun had been on the snow, and it formed a really nice crust. So going out in snowshoes was really cool, because you didn't sink in at all. You just walked totally on top of the snow. But if you went out in winter boots, you could walk on top of the snow for like 3 steps, but then you'd go through. And just when you weren't expecting it, you'd go through. So obviously the snowshoes were really good in that particular case. So what other gear do you need for snowshoeing? You can use hiking or winter boots. Hiking boots are sometimes good enough because your feet are up out of the snow, so they generally don't get that cold, and you get warm when you're snowshoeing. Also, the hiking boots can strap into the snowshoes better if they have a nice heel. If you get the type of snow boots that are kind of like moccasins, they can be hard to strap in. Also, you need the clothing you need. You shouldn't have cotton clothing, because when you go out, you get hot, you get sweating, clothing gets wet, and cotton loses its insulation. Not so bad if you just go out in your backyard and then you come in the house, but if you're winter camping, if you're going to be out for a while, you probably want to avoid cotton clothing. Shell pants are important. If you fall in the snow, you don't want to get all wet again. But the other big thing about shell pants, as opposed to just fleece pants, is burrs. If you go out in the woods, you can end up getting covered with burrs without even knowing it. They are hard to get off. So try not to have any wool or fleece where it's going to rub against something that's going to give you burrs on it. And also you want to have layers for your clothing, because you can go out when it's really cold and you end up getting warm, because it is a workout. So then you end up like this because you get so hot. But yeah, enough of that. So it was like 30 degrees that day, and it was way too warm to be snowshoeing. Another thing you might want to get is gaiters for your boots. Go on top of your boots because you don't want to get snow down in your boots and get wet feet. That's not very comfortable. Then other thing you might want is day pack to put all your layers in when you start taking them off. Sunglasses, sunblock if it's sunny and you get the reflection off the snow, of course. And then another question, do you need poles? Personally, I don't use poles. I don't use them hiking either. That's just my preference. I know a lot of people like to use poles. The thing is with snowshoeing, the snowshoes are pretty wide, so they are pretty stable. And also, if you're snowshoeing in deep snow, the poles are going to have to be longer. So you need poles that are adjustable and long enough if you're in deep snow. So if you want to get poles, REI has a large selection and they'll be happy to help you out there. And there's some in the equipment locker too. Crampons are another thing. You get those on the aluminum snowshoes. You could put them on the wooden snowshoes. But if you're in deep snow, you really don't need them. It's just if you get in icy conditions, which sometimes you just don't know and you run into those conditions, and then they can be very useful. So where to snowshoe? There are so many options here. It's nice, which is better. There's more options than if you want to go cross-country skiing or something else. Snowshoeing, there's a lot of options. Like I said earlier, outside your front door, if you want to walk down to the store, depending on where you live, after a big snowstorm, it's handy. City parks, local parks, regional parks. I mean, there's a lot of parks around. You're probably not very far from the nearest park. Down here, I'm in the south end of town. We got Lebanon Hills, which is really great for snowshoeing. Whitetail Woods, in the north, Bunker Hills. Fort Snelling State Park is more central, is another great place. Tamarack Park, a lot of options. One thing I didn't know about, I just found out recently, thank you, Jody, is after a big snow, you can go and snowshoe on the mountain bike trails because they want the snow packed down so they can go riding on it. And when it's fresh, it's obviously not packed down and it's not good for riding on. So go out on the mountain bike trails, but once it is packed down and the mountain bikes return, you probably want to get off it, but that's not too bad. Some places will have snowshoe rental. Some places will have guided hikes. Well, with COVID, it's messing everything up, but we'll get through this at some point, hopefully. But nature centers, state parks will have guided hikes. Now, if you want to go further afield, the North Shore is definitely, in my opinion, the best place for good snow. Most years, they get really good snow. Now, one place I want to make a plug for, I volunteered here for a number of years, which is Dodge Nature Center. If you're not familiar with the area, it's in West St. Paul, which is south of St. Paul. So it's south of St. Paul, and you've got 35E here, you got 52 here, and 62, which used to be 110. And here are there's three Dodge Nature Center properties there. They have a new one in Cottage Grove too. But the nice thing about this, one of the big challenges for going snowshoeing after we have a big snowfall is parking. Unless you've got an all-wheel drive car, you can't always find a good place to park to go snowshoeing. But the nice thing here, this property just south of 62, is there's a church right here. So if you go after the Sunday service, hopefully they're going to have that parking lot plowed out and you're going to be able to park there. And there's parking lots here, which I don't know how quick they are to plow them out. So that's sometimes a challenge, finding good parking. But this place doesn't get super busy. And here particularly, this is called the Lily property. And there's prairie, there's woods, there's savanna, wetland. So lots of places to go explore. And there's the website if you want to go check it out, or just Google it. And here's a bunch of other places. So Minneapolis Parks has a website with snowshoeing information on. If you just Google it, you'll find some of this. Anoka County, Three Rivers Parks. And here's some park suggestions that are a little out of the cities, a little out of the metro area. So there's a lot of options. Now I'm going to show some places I've been snowshoeing. Most of the time, or maybe all of them, was on rover trips. Itasca State Park, Lake Itasca, so you can go out on the lake or you can go through the woods. This area was interesting when you get a lot of reeds or if you're in the woods, sometimes the grass and that will keep the snow up and there's pockets, air pockets or spaces underneath. So sometimes you'll find areas that will kind of collapse down, but it just, it's all part of the fun. Oberg Mountain and up on the North Shore on the Superior Hiking Trail. That's a good spot to go up. This is the ice caves here. This is out on Lake Superior. If there's fresh snow, this can be a good place to snowshoe. A lot of the time it gets packed down and then you get ice pressure ridges from the lake. So not always good, but it can be. What is better often is going above the ice caves through the woods. If there's fresh snow, if it's not packed down too much. This is National Forest Lodge. This is again on a rover trip. They almost guarantee good snow up there. They tend to get a lot of snow. They're up by Ely, just where they're positioned up on the hill, above Lake Superior. This is Madeline Island, again, right near Bayfield. Bayfield gets more snow than we do too. It seems like it's always snowing every day or two up there. I think it's probably lake effect snow. Superior Hiking Trail. So when you want to build up your skills, Superior Hiking Trail is great because there's some pretty steep up and down hills there. So it can be challenging in some areas. Other areas are more flat. This is near the Gunflint Trail. Again, another nice place out in the woods. This is a lake up near Grand Rapids. This day was about 20 below, but I don't think the wind was really blowing that day because out on the lake is not my favorite place to be if the wind's blowing. Also, I'm still nervous about being out on the ice, so I'll mention that again in a minute. But going out on lakes can be fun. So snowshoe safety, where not to snowshoe. And this, I think, could be more of a concern this year because if you get a lot of people that aren't used to going out in the woods, now with COVID, they want to get out and they want to go snowshoeing and they're not maybe used to being out in the winter. So you want to be a little careful. So make sure you tell someone where you're going. Take a cell phone that has a good charge in it and keep it in a pocket where it's going to be warm and hopefully know where you're going to get a signal. Maybe take a GPS. And again, maybe you want spare batteries. Make sure you get out of there. Okay. So you want to be a little careful because a small fall and injury when you're out, a long way from houses and it's really cold could be serious. The other place you definitely don't want to go is on the ski trails because cross-country skiers get really angry if they find you messing up their trails. And I'm a cross-country skier too, so I get it. Also, a lot of cross-country skiers, they're paying either a ski pass or the Lebanon Hills you have to pay to get a pass. So you're paying to get those trails groomed. So for example, Lebanon Hills and other parks, there's a limited area where there's ski trails and everywhere else you can go snowshoeing. So you don't really need to go on the ski trails. The other place that makes me nervous is out on, like I mentioned, lakes and rivers. This is up on the North Shore. And those rivers up there freeze up. And this is actually a waterfall here that's frozen up. But that water is still going underneath and it's going pretty fast. So you want to be really, really careful out there because when you've got snowshoes on your feet, I mean, I don't want to ever go through the ice anyway, but when you've got snowshoes on your feet, that can't be good, right? And you got more water moving under the ice. Yeah, that's kind of a nightmare scenario. So what you want to do is make sure you send some nice heavy people on ahead of you to test out the ice before you go on it. But just stay by the side, just be real careful. The other thing I want to mention here too is I was hiking in Fort Snelling State Park and I actually put a snowshoe through the ice. And it was pretty cold. I thought it was going to be solid. Luckily, the water wasn't deep. But the other thing you want to watch out for is in the metro area, if you get salt leaching off the roads, the ice may not be as solid as you think it should be. And another example of that is in Itasca State Park. I was hiking there when it was something crazy like 20 below or 10 below, and I could hear water running because there were springs. There's springs that go into that lake. So obviously you want to be super careful. Okay, so how do you snowshoe? Well, it's really pretty simple. You put one foot in front of the other. It's like walking. You need to have your feet a little wider apart because obviously you got the snowshoe. But a couple of tips. What you want to do is when you stop and stand still is keep one foot in front of the other because the snowshoes tend to nest together like this, and these do. Aluminum, not so much, but a lot of the snowshoes do. So figure out which is a good standing position, and maybe it's better to have one foot in front of the other. The other thing you want to watch is when you're in a big group and you're following one after the other, don't stand on the snowshoes of the person in front of you. Give them plenty of room. I've seen that happen a lot when I was helping with hikes at the nature center. Another thing to watch out for is if you're stepping over lugs and things, don't ever form a bridge like this with a snowshoe up on the log and the other end down on the snow. With aluminum snowshoes, you're probably going to get away with it. But with wooden snowshoes, that's how they would get broken at the Dodge Nature Center when I was doing snowshoe hikes there. So the way to get over a log, we have a demonstration here. You either go sideways and step right over it like this, so you're not bridging it, or step up on top of it and then just jump down. And in deep snow, that's kind of fun to do anyway. But so just don't put the weight on the snowshoe with the two ends of it held up. Another thing is falling over. It's really easy to fall over, but it's not always so easy to get up again, especially if you're in really deep snow, because you fall over, you put your arm down to push yourself up and your arm disappears in the snow. So one way to do it is if you're with someone, get them to help you up, get them to pull you up. Or if you roll over on your back and you get the snowshoes level underneath you, then you can hopefully get back up again. Another way is take the snowshoes off, stand up and put them back on again. But again, if it's really deep snow, it's challenging, but you know, it's all part of the fun, right? And now I'm going to end up with a few advanced snowshoe techniques. Getting up hills. So crampons are good if it's icy or packed snow, but if it's loose snow, they're not going to help you. So going up a hill, the best way to do it is you really want to stamp down that snowshoe, because if you stamp it down, you get some snow coming up through the gaps, whatever kind of snowshoe it is, and it helps grip into the snow, and then hopefully you can get up the hill. Going down hills is challenging too. If it's loose snow, what you can do, if you're lucky, is start going down very carefully, and the snow will start sliding down, and then you can ride the avalanche to the bottom. That's the good way to do it. But, you know, it doesn't always work out the way you want it to. Crossing streams. Now, this is by the caves up by Lake Superior. Now, most of these are boardwalks. But if you want to cross a stream like this, you probably want to take your snowshoes off. Particularly if you were going to use wooden ones, you don't want to be walking over rocks. Hopefully these weren't Rover snowshoes that he's using now, but it's probably better to take them off. And the last thing is crossing creeks on trees. If you want to get adventurous, you can do this. But I avoided that tree, but I did do this other one. No hay problema. Okay, so the moral of that story is don't try to speak Spanish and snowshoe at the same time. If you're going to fall off, make sure you're over the creek first. And also that snowshoeing is easy as falling off a log. So if there's any questions, let me know.
Barry, where did you say you could get kits to make snowshoes?
You can probably get them at different places, but snowshoe.com is the one I'm familiar with. I think they're actually based in Minnesota, but it's just snowshoe.com. And you can order them there. I think you can also buy them other places, but I'm not sure where. I'm sure you can Google it.
I will point out that the Ojibwe style snowshoes that you saw pictured from the Rover's Gear Locker are all made by Rovers from kits. So interesting tidbit.
That's good. That's interesting. No, I wondered where they came from. That's cool.
Yeah, somebody organized a trip and several people ordered kits and they kind of all did it in somebody's garage together, I believe. Probably somebody's here that might have been part of that.
Good to know.
Hi, I'd like to ask about boots. You mentioned hiking boots. Would Sorel boots that come up to the calf be too bulky?
Let me go back. I can show you something here. If I get back to the beginning. If I can remember. Okay, so here you go. If you look at this boot in the snowshoe, you've got a strap here and a strap here. The issue with some boots is this back strap. A normal boot or a regular boot like this is a winter boot, but it's got a lip there, and hiking boots have that. So that's the only thing. If you have a snow boot that's like a sorrel, I think would be fine. If you have like a what do you call, moccasin kind of style boot, you may not have that, and then that strap might slip off.
Okay,
Say thank you.
thank you.
The only thing to worry about. And some of the winter boots are so huge, it's hard to get the straps around. We've helped with snowshoe hiking at Fort Snelling for REI, and sometimes people show up with boots that are really hard to get the snowshoes on.
Many of the sorels have that knob right on the heel, I believe, just for that. So I'm thinking sorels would be pretty safe.
I have a pair of sorrels and snowshoes, and I use the sorrels with my snowshoes, and they work perfectly. So
Yeah.
Hi, Barry. I have a question about heel lifts. The ones I'm looking at right now that I'm thinking about purchasing have a heel lift option, and there's another version that doesn't have heel lifts. And I'm wondering, I don't anticipate going uphill, but should I get some with heel lifts in case I ever do? What are your thoughts on
I just saw that, and I was thinking about that. I think they use them on Everest, don't they? Because they go uphill for a long time as they're going up there. But unless you're going uphill for a long time, I don't know that I'd bother. It's just, I don't know, it's just something else. I admit I never tried them though. But unless you're going uphill for a long period of time, I don't think they'd be necessary. I don't know whether anyone else has used them and think they're really good. I don't know, because I've never used them.
We rented some snowshoes last year in Canada, and they had them, and they were kind of fun to try, and they definitely helped with the fatigue if you were going up a hill for a long period of time. But like Barry said, especially in Minnesota, you're probably not going up for a long period of time, so it was kind of a novelty. It was kind of nice. It was different. And then and they were easy to flip up and down. So when it got flat again, we'd just flip them down. So I was using them, but my own snowshoes don't have them, and I don't think that I'll miss them. And it's fun when you are on flat and you're using them. It feels like you're wearing heels.
For bigger folks, 6'5", 300+ pounds, how does snowshoeing fare for those types of folks, and do the poles help, sort of mitigate that?
Well, in that case, I'd say you're just going to get the biggest pair of snowshoes you can find, because I'm sure most snowshoes aren't designed for someone that big. Like I say, I don't use poles. I'm sure other people swear by them and use poles, but you can always get them and try them out.
Hey, this is Carrie, real quick on the snowshoes for bigger people. When we purchased our snowshoes at REI, they were basing the size on our height and weight. So
exactly. Anyone that fits you they'll ask you your weight. So I went in there and just lied and said, but I usually carry 20 pounds of lead weight with me for reserve. But
yeah, we found them really helpful.
Ask your weight.
The thing is, it's really going to depend on what you're snowshoeing on too, though, because most of the time I see people snowshoeing, they're snowshoeing on packed trails. So if all you're going to have a snowshoe on is like, they do have specific like snowshoe trails at Lebanon Hills. If you go on those, they're normally packed down. A lot of places are. If you really want to get off in the woods, and especially if it's light snow and it's deep snow, then you're going to need bigger snowshoes, obviously. So,
Barry, can I share my screen? I took a picture of Rover snowshoes that has the weight limit on them. Yeah, so there's the weight limits. And we have a pair here up to 300 pounds. This 150 to 250. So if you're smaller, you can go with the smaller one, 120 to 200. So I just thought I'd share that.
And for what it's worth, we wrote those on, except for the pair to the right, all those other ones we wrote on there so that it would be very obvious to people. Or I probably put them on that one too. Yeah, I did. So it's not going to say that loud and clear when you're going shopping for them.
But like I said, it is going to depend on the conditions, because if you go off in loose snow a lot and in deep snow, you want big snowshoes. But then obviously bigger snowshoes are harder to maneuver with. So you got to decide, well, am I mostly going to go on kind of packed trails, or do I really want to go off in the woods, which I think is really fun to just go off and explore. Where I was crossing that tree was up by Bayfield, a place called Jerry Jolly's, which a lot of rovers know. And there was a lot of nice deep snow there. But there was also a trail through there where a lot of people had walked. When we were on that, we took the snowshoes off because we really didn't need them. But off in the woods, we really needed them, and the snow was really deep. So,
This is Jane. I'd just like to make a comment. You can also buy them at Midwest Mountaineering. That's where I bought mine. And recently, Shields just opened up here in Eden Prairie. I would assume you can buy them at Shields. And I also bought a pair that was a women's pair. So for you women out there, you might want to see if you can compare a standard pair to a women's pair to see if that works for you.
What's the difference?
Well, I think they're a little more narrow. I rented a pair from REI first, which were, I'll just say unisex, I presume. But I kept stepping on the other shoe on the inside. And so I was really having to walk like I had just gotten off a 1,000-mile horse ride to keep my feet further apart. And when I was at the expo, I stopped and talked to them and looked at shoes, and they showed me some women's pairs. And that works a little bit better for me because I don't have to have my feet quite so far apart. It's a little more comfortable.
That's good to know. Yeah, I didn't know they had that. So are they a little bit longer to make up for the not as wide?
I don't know. I mean, they sized me based on my, height and weight, so they work great for me. I also use poles. I can either use my hiking poles with the baskets on them, but I've also been on plenty of rover trips where people were just using their ski poles.
Thank you.